broad-shouldered person, he looked slightly out of place at an office desk, as if when he stood up he would tip it over. But Osborne merely felt cosy. He warmed to the very mottos on the walls. Ne'er cast a clout till May be out. It's not spring until you can plant your foot upon 12 daisies, and thought of the parable of the seed on fertile ground. Also, not for the first time, he wondered whether anyone on the staff actually had a garden. A man who has been buffeted by life needs a place where he can lay down his string bags. He needs a place where he can sit at an old Tippex-spattered Adler, treat himself to a free cup of tea, miss his deadline by hours, stand helpless at the photocopier until someone rescues him, fill his pockets at the stationery cupboard, and make hour-long surreptitious phone calls to old journo-muckers in faraway foreign parts. Come into the garden was that place for Osborne. Today, however, it seemed there was no one about. Osborne removed a few thick, dank layers of navy blue outdoor garment, the month was November, and hung them on a coat stand, which promptly collapsed under the weight. "Bugger," he said, and ran his fingers through his short grey hair. Where was everybody? He looked around for clues. A half-empty mail sack lay limp in the middle of reception, but he was aware that little could be deduced from this. Lillian, who had now disappeared, famously claimed to have a medical problem with sorting the post, due to a rare neurotic-compulsive fear of envelopes. Such a condition was obviously unfortunate in a secretary, almost a disqualification, you might think, but there you were. This unfortunate and improbable malady meant that post-sorting was an all-day process, with a half-empty mail sack permanently dumped on the floor as a kind of endless reproach, and most of the editorial staff steering sensibly well clear and simply learning never to depend too heavily on the prompt dispersal of correspondence. Lillian's wont was to stoop and sigh over a heap of letters, laboriously examining each one with the aid of tongs, and stopping chance passers-by with faux-naïve questions evidently calculated to drive them mad. "Look, this says John Mannering, editor," she might say, waving the ironware in a wild, threatening manner. "But the editor's name is James Mannering." Here she would pause to ascertain what reaction she was getting, usually uneasy silence. "What do you think? Shall I send it back, or pitch it in the bin?" No one ever knew what to say to this sort of thing. After all, you don't argue with mad people, especially when they're equipped to clock you with a pair of tongs. So Lillian got away with it, as she got away with everything else. And in between these bouts of petty tyranny, she would sit quietly at her desk, ignoring the phones, and give her full attention to the smoking of a cigarette, on the grounds, presumably, that if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing well. It seemed odd to be in the office on his own. Osborne was assailed by an understandable fear that he'd forgotten an important appointment elsewhere, an appointment that his green-ink-fingered friends had evidently all remembered. Even the tireless sub-editors were missing from their workstations, and Osborne marvelled when he peered into their book-lined room and saw their 4 empty chairs, a sight he realised that few people other than the night cleaners had ever previously witnessed. The fabric on one of the chairs turned out to be a jaunty rich tartan, but no wonder he'd never suspected it when a sub-editor's drab grey jumper and unkempt shirt, not to mention his drab grey unkempt body, had always blocked the view. Like many writers, Osborne was afraid of sub-editors. The trouble being that they had a disarming habit of changing his prose automatically without telling him. "Ah, the further musings of the giant intellect," the chief sub-editor might say with gratuitous cruelty as she took his copy each week. And then, the moment he had left the room, she fell on it savagely with a thick blue pen, taking out all the bits he was most proud of. In his more gloomy moments, he wondered why he bothered to write the piece in the first place, when the subsequent contribution of the sub-editor so often outweighed his own. He had been known to quote the lament of Macduff, "What, all my little chicks?" at the thought of his innocents massacred. And you couldn't blame him. "Not in my backyard," he had once confidently typed in a piece about a politician, only to discover a few days later in the printed magazine that it had been rewritten as "not on my patio," which was not quite the same. In the stealthy, unnatural quiet of the sub-editor's room, dictionaries and half-corrected proofs lay open on abandoned desks. Osborne tiptoed guiltily, like a schoolboy finding himself alone in an after-hours classroom when everyone has gone home. To stay his nerves, he helped himself to an extra-strong mint from a roll next to the chief sub-editor's typewriter, careful not to disarrange her impressive selection of nail varnishes, and peered from an awkward position at the proof she had been correcting, which was covered in tiny blue marks and explanatory notes circled with a feminine flourish.